Well, hello again, Lady Grove Park Primary School. I hope you're all keeping well. Don't know if you've been watching much telly recently, but there's been interviews by some people, and then there's been other people commenting on those interviews and criticising what's been said, and you've got other people who have been supporting what was said originally and criticising the person who's been criticising them. And before you know it, it seems there's quite a bit certainly on the news and other current affairs programs, where it's just one person having a go at another person who's having a go at another person who disagrees with this. And it's all quite tiring. And it got me thinking about, well, there's a bit in the Bible written in a letter that I thought I would share with you today and see what you think about this. So it's in a letter by a guy called James. It's near the end of the Bible. James is believed to have been one of the younger brothers of Jesus and wrote quite a lot of, I guess, wise suggestions about how we should live our lives for the better. And this is what James has to say. Firstly, he points out that when you're riding a horse, there's this bit that you put in the horse's mouth, called, funny enough, a bit. And it's only quite small, really, just a piece of metal that goes in the mouth of the horse. And then, as you can see there, the reins are attached to it. And yet, although it's only just a small piece of equipment in the horse's mouth, it enables the rider to direct the way the horse is going, to go to the left or go to the right or slow down or speed up. And then he also goes on to say, on a boat or on a ship, you have what is really quite a small piece of equipment. When you think how big some of these ships are, these huge cruisers, the rudder is quite small. And while you have a propeller to push the ship forward, it is actually the rudder that decides which way the boat is going to go, that small piece of equipment. And he explains that, well, us human beings have got a small piece of equipment called a tongue. And that is when you compare that to the whole of who you are, it is quite a small bit of muscle. And yet he explains it's a bit like the rudder of a boat. It can control so much. When you think about it, the way that you use your tongue can decide who would like to be your friend, can help create enemies, can get you recommendations, can get you jobs, or lose the jobs as well. And then James goes on to explain that, well, you just think about a forest fire. And I don't know if you've seen, certainly last year in the news, there were fires, horrendous fires in the United States where some people lost their lives. And we saw also fires going on in some of the lands in this country, the moors and places like that. And James said, it's not as though those fires are caused by this dirty great lump of flame being dumped there. No, fires are often caused just by a small spark, the careless leaving of a small, maybe barbecue. And yet all the damage that they cause, all the destruction of woodland, the death of animals and bugs and reptiles and birds. Just a little spark can cause so much damage. And he says it's a bit like that with our tongues. And I guess the more I think about this, I have to agree with James. Just a few ideas here. You just think, when we call people names, maybe someone has said something or done something a bit silly or something that's annoyed us. And before we know it, we're going at them. You are such a... calling them names, being unkind to them. Even if they didn't mean it, even if they did something by accident. And while it's only taken us a second or two to go at them, We don't ever know what our words do in that person's thoughts and in their lives. I have met people who really, even as adults, still carry scars of unkind things that were said to them in the past, and which they have taken on board, and almost it's made them made part of their identity. Just a small spark can destroy or damage a life. And then sometimes we find things funny, don't we? And it's okay if someone tells us a joke to laugh at that joke, but sometimes we're tempted to laugh at them, aren't we? Maybe, again, it might be just a simple mistake they've made. They've got something wrong, or they've tripped over and accidentally done something. Before we know it, we're laughing at them. It's highly tempting because, let's face it, a lot of comedy is made in that way. But again, that can hurt somebody more than we ever realise. A spark causing a lot of damage. And then what about our temptation to exaggerate things, to make things bigger? That again can have a knock-on effect. We might see something at school. I mean, this is an extreme example, but what happens? Someone in there, they've got a cup of water, they knock it over, and it just spills and damages a piece of a book. And then you go home, you'll never guess what so-and-so, they flooded the class, Mum. They nearly flooded the class. The water went everywhere. It just damaged. Oh, you'll never guess. And the teacher was furious. And then Mum maybe speaks to their neighbour. You'll never guess what. The whole school was flooded. They had to get the children out. Before you know it, as things get blown out of all proportion, we discover that Didcot was flooded. Now, that, as I say, is an extreme example, but sometimes by making things bigger, making things sound worse than they are, making them sound more harmful than they were, well, they can make the situation a lot worse than actually the situation was in the first place. And then what about some of the questions we ask? And I sort of think often happens when maybe we meet someone who has a different understanding in a different way. Maybe they come from a different culture. The colour of their skin is different. Their beliefs, their religion is different. And we might be sort of thinking, oh, I wonder why they do that. I wonder why they say that. I wonder why they wear that. And sometimes the question, or the way that we ask the question, even though it is well-meaning, we're trying to discover more about that person may hear our question in a way that's insensitive, that's unkind. So sometimes, or always, I would say, we need to think about what are we saying? What are we asking? Not so much what's coming out of our mouths, but how will the other person's ears hear what we say? Will they hear it as a sensible question, or will they hear it as a criticism or an attack on who they are? James goes on. He says, if you're thirsty, well, in modern day terms, you'd go to a tap, wouldn't you? Imagine you're in the playground and you think, oh, I could really do with a drink of water. Well, you'd go to a tap, wouldn't you? You wouldn't say, oh, there's a puddle in the playground here. Oh, that's water. I'll go and drink from that. No, you wouldn't, because it's dirty. And even you wouldn't certainly sort of say, well, it's a puddle. It might have a bit of dirt in it, but that dirt is likely to have sunk to the ground. So if I only drink the top bit of the water, that should be okay. You wouldn't even think about that, would you? You'd go, I am going to the tap. That is guaranteed fresh water. Well, so it can be with people. If people want to be in the company of others, will they go to the person that might offer them fresh water, but actually they might be a bit muddy? Or would they go to the person that they know is definitely going to be fresh water? Would they go to someone whose words they know are going to be kind and helpful and generous? Or will they go to somebody who's, well, he might be kind to me, But then again, they might be really horrible. No, I'll give that person a miss. And the same, James says, with trees. If you want an apple, you don't go to a pear tree, you go to an apple tree, because you know that's where apples will come from. You don't sort of go, well, I know it's a pear tree, but who knows, just this once we might get an apple out of them. No, you go to where you know the apple's going to be. And you will find that people whose words are helpful and kind and creative and supportive are the ones who get friends more easily, because people like to hear words that are kind and helpful and generous. There's another book in the Bible which is absolutely full of wise ideas, called Book of Proverbs. And there it says, those who are careful about what they say keep themselves out of trouble. In other words, we need to take care with our words. And that's not just what we say. It obviously was in the times that the Bible was written, but it's also about what we write, what we put in an email, what we put on social media. We can be helpful and creative, or we can be damaging. And those people who use words that are unkind and damaging, well, they might draw the attention of other people who like to be hurtful and unkind, but actually it's far better. You get far better friends when the things you say, even if somebody has done something a bit silly, are words that are helpful and caring and kind. So as usual, I'm just going to finish with a little thought and prayer. If you'd like to listen to what I'm about to say, and if you think, yep, I agree with what Hugh's just said, well, you can say amen at the end, which just means, yep, I agree. Otherwise, just have a think. Think about the words that you say. Maybe think about something you said to a friend today. Maybe you might need to say sorry and make things up. Let's just close our eyes and think. So we thank you for that letter that James wrote. Thank you for the wisdom that he shared, recognizing that while our tongues are quite small, they can be quite powerful in creating a world that is kind and helpful, or they can create a world where there is nothing but criticism and hatred and distraction. Help us to be careful with our words, whether we say them, whether we write them. May they be words that build people up, that make people feel cared for and appreciated, because we know that that is the way to a world where people are loved and where people feel confident. So may our words today and throughout our lives be ones that are like fresh water, that we might see a better world. Amen. Well, thank you for listening again. You take care of one another, and I'll see you again soon. God bless.